The night before they tried to erase me, they threw me a party. Champagne, the kind Celia always said was wasted on people who couldn't taste the difference. My husband stood up in the middle of our own living room, tapped a fork against his glass, and told a room full of our friends how proud he was of me. To Nora, he said, "The heart of everything we've built." Everyone raised their glasses. Celia, my best friend of 19 years, my business partner, caught my eye across the room and mouthed the words, "I love you." I want you to hold on to that image because I did. I held on to it for a long time. And I need you to understand exactly how much I believed it so that you understand what came after. My name is Nora. I am the person who reads the whole contract. Every page, every clause, the paragraph in 6-point type that everyone else skips. I was the kid who read the cereal box, the instruction manual, the fine print on the back of the concert ticket. People find it exhausting. I find it comforting. If you know exactly what the words say, no one can tell you later that they meant something else. I built an entire career on that one small stubborn habit. I run a design firm. Well, I ran a design firm. That distinction is the whole story, and by the end you'll know exactly when the tense changed and who changed it and what it cost them to try. My father left when I was 9. Not dramatically. He just started coming home later, then some nights not at all. Then one Sunday his side of the closet was empty, and my mother was very calm about it in a way that scared me more than crying would have. I decided something that year, the way children decide things, all at once and forever. I decided I would be the one who stayed, the one you could count on, the one who did the unglamorous work that held everything together so that no one I loved would ever wake up to an empty closet. I know how that sounds now. I know what a person like me looks like to a certain kind of man. I look like a foundation you could build on and never have to think. I met Adam at a trade show when I was 31. I was manning a booth for the firm I worked at then, exhausted, my feet ruined, and he walked up and asked me a question about a fabric sample and then asked me for more just to keep me talking. He had a way of making you feel like the only lit window on a dark street. That was his gift. Adam could walk into any room, and by the time he left, 3 strangers thought they were his closest friend. I mistook that for warmth. It took me 11 years to understand it was a tool, and that a tool doesn't love you. It just gets used on you over and over, until the day you finally see the hand holding it. Celia I had known far longer. We met in design school at 19, assigned as studio partners, and she was everything I wasn't. Loud where I was quiet. Fearless with color. She could sketch something in 30 seconds that made a client gasp. I was the one who made her brilliant ideas actually stand up in the real world, the one who priced them and sourced them and made sure the beautiful thing could survive a family with a dog and 2 toddlers. For 19 years that was our deal. Unspoken, but perfect. She was the spark. I was the wiring. It never once occurred to me to be jealous of the spark. A spark can't heat a house by itself. I knew that. I thought she knew it too. The 3 of us started the firm 11 years ago, around my kitchen table, on a night that felt like the beginning of the rest of our lives. We called it Halden Row, a name Celia invented because she said clients trust 2 surnames even if the surnames are made up. Adam would bring in the business. Celia would design. I would run everything else, which is to say, everything. The books, the contracts, the vendors, the payroll, the leases, the licenses, the insurance, the client relationships that had to be managed like delicate weather systems. I drew up our operating agreement myself. I want you to remember that. I sat at that same kitchen table and I wrote, in careful plain language, exactly who owned what and exactly how any one of us could ever be bought out. I wrote it to protect all 3 of us. I had no idea I was writing my own rescue. For 7 years it worked. It really worked. We grew from 3 people to 14. We won awards Celia accepted on stages while I sat in the audience clapping until my hands hurt, genuinely, without a shred of resentment, because her win was our win, and I meant it. Adam charmed the clients into signing and I charmed the numbers into balancing. We bought a house, Adam and I, a real one, with a study I designed for him and a garden I planted myself. On our anniversaries, he still drove me to the coast. I thought I had beaten the thing my father taught me to fear. I thought I had built the one thing that would never leave. I was so proud of us that it embarrasses me now. Not because pride is wrong, because I was proud of a thing that only 3 of us were actually building. The other 2 were quietly building something else. The first thing I noticed was so small, I'm almost ashamed to tell you. Adam and Celia started having their own jokes. Little references I wasn't in on, a shorthand that would flicker between them across a conference table, and then vanish when I looked up. I told myself it was natural. They worked together too. Old friends collect inside jokes like lint. But there is a specific loneliness in being the third person at a table where the other 2 are speaking a language you helped invent and no longer understand. I felt it, and I named it something safe. I named it being tired. I named it work stress. I named it anything except the true name, because the true name would have required me to look directly at a thing I could not yet afford to see. Then the money started moving in ways I didn't recognize, and money is the one language I have never once misread. I found a new vendor account with regular payments to a consulting entity I'd never approved. When I asked Adam, he laughed and said it was a branding contractor Celia brought in, that I'd been so buried in the year-end close he hadn't wanted to bother me with something so minor. He said it the way he said everything difficult, easily, with a little affection, like I was adorable for worrying. And here is the part one have had to forgive myself for. I let it go. Because when the person you trust most explains away the very thing your gut is screaming about, you have 2 choices. Distrust him, or distrust yourself. And I had spent my whole life being the reliable one. I did not yet know how to distrust Adam. So I distrusted me. It was a text message in the end. It's almost always something that stupid. Adam's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower, and I glanced at it the way you glance at a phone that has been on your own counter for 11 years without a single secret. The message was from Celia. It said, "She signs Thursday, and then it's done. Stop looking guilty. You're terrible at this." I read it maybe 6 times. I remember the exact quality of the light, thin and gray, a Tuesday morning in March. I remember the water running upstairs. I remember thinking very calmly that I did not know what I was signing on Thursday. And then I remembered that I did. On Thursday, they had told me we were signing a routine restructuring of the firm. A modernization, Celia had called it. Just paperwork, Adam had said. "You'll want to read it," they'd added, laughing, "because you read everything." I did not confront him. I want to be honest about how strange that was, even to me. Every instinct in a normal person says scream, throw the phone, wait by the bathroom door. But I have spent my whole life reading contracts, and a contract has taught me one thing above all others. The moment you reveal what you know, you hand the other side time to prepare. I had until Thursday. Whatever they were not finished yet, and a thing that is not finished can still be caught in the act. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I put the phone back exactly where it had been, at exactly the angle it had been, and when Adam came down with wet hair and kissed the top of my head and said something about the weather, I smiled and I said, "Drive safe." And then I sat down at my kitchen table, the one where we'd started the whole thing, and I opened a blank document, and at the top I typed one word. Timeline. Here is what I already had before I even started digging, because a person who runs everything has access to everything. I had the operating agreement I'd written myself. I had 11 years of financial records. I had every email that had ever passed through our firm, because I was the administrator of our own systems, a detail so boring that Adam and Celia had long ago stopped thinking of me as a person who could see and started thinking of me as a kind of furniture that filed things. That is the mistake. That is always the mistake with people like me. They confuse quiet with blind. They confuse the person who never makes a scene with the person who never sees the scene. I saw everything. I had always seen everything. I had simply, until that Tuesday, chosen to believe the best of what I saw. It took me 3 nights to reconstruct what they'd done, and it was worse and stupider than an affair, though it was also that. The consulting entity siphoning money was Celia's, under a name that was almost but not quite hers. Adam had been routing firm funds into it for 14 months. But the real machine was the Thursday document. I read all 41 pages the way I read everything, slowly, with a pen. Buried in the restructuring, in language designed to look like modernization, was a revised ownership structure that diluted my share from an equal third down to 9%, triggered a buyout clause at a valuation they had quietly, deliberately understated, and named Adam and Celia as joint managing partners with the authority to remove me for cause. They had even pre-drafted the cause: failure to contribute to the strategic direction of the firm. The woman who ran the entire firm. My hands did not shake. I noticed that they didn't, and I found it interesting in a distant way, like weather happening to someone else. And the affair, yes. I found it the way you find the last piece of something you already know the shape of. Hotel receipts on the branding consultant card. A recurring Thursday that had never actually been a client dinner. Photos in a shared cloud folder Celia had forgotten I administered, because of course she had, because I was furniture. There was one from our own anniversary trip, the coast 2 years ago. Adam had told me he'd stepped out to take a work call. In the photo he is laughing on a balcony with my best friend of 19 years, and I am, presumably, 40 feet away, ordering us both breakfast, being reliable. That was the only night I cried, and I cried for about 40 minutes on the floor of the study I had designed for him, and then I got up and washed my face, and I did not cry again for a very long time. Grief, I had learned once before, is patient. It will wait for you. Right then, I had work to do. There is a phone call I need to tell you about, because it changed the temperature of everything. I called Ruth. Ruth was my first boss, 20 years ago, a fearsome, elegant woman who ran a design firm for 4 decades and had, in a former life, been a lawyer, and had once told me that the two professions were the same job, arranging things so beautifully that no one notices the load-bearing wall. Ruth was 78 and answered on the second ring. I told her everything in a flat, orderly voice. When I finished, there was a long silence, and then she said, "Nora, listen to me. Do not feel this yet. You will feel all of it, I promise you, and it will be terrible, and you will survive it. But not this week. This week you do not get to be heartbroken. This week you are the smartest person in the room, and you are going to let them keep believing you're the dumbest. Can you do that?" And I said yes. And she said, "Good girl. Now, tell me about this operating agreement you wrote." Because here is what Celia never understood, in 19 years of watching me do the boring parts. She thought the operating agreement was my chore. It was my cathedral. I had written it alone at that kitchen table, and I had written it fair, but I had written it precisely, and precision cuts both ways. Their entire coup depended on one clause, the buyout mechanism, being triggered against me at their chosen valuation. But the clause I wrote didn't say the managing partners could trigger it. It said any partner could trigger a buyout event, and that whoever triggered it set the terms of the independent valuation. They had spent months engineering a gun. They had simply never checked which way it was pointed. Ruth laughed, actually laughed, an old woman's delighted bark, when I read it to her. She said, "They built you a door, dear. All you have to do is decide who walks through it." But leverage is not the same as proof, and Ruth taught me the difference in a single sentence. She said, "A clever woman wins the argument. A patient woman makes sure there's no argument left to have." So, I did not trigger anything. Not yet. I did something much harder. I decided to let Thursday happen. I decided to sit at that signing and let them think they had won, because a plan that is merely attempted can be explained away, but a plan that is completed, signed, dated, and celebrated is a confession with a champagne toast attached. I needed them all the way in. I needed Adam's signature and Celia's signature on a document moving firm assets into their control, next to the paper trail of the money they'd already stolen, so that the fraud was not a suspicion but a finished, notarized fact. I needed them to finish the crime before I finished mine. So for 2 weeks I became the happiest, most agreeable version of myself that has ever existed. I asked Celia to lunch and let her talk about her new boyfriend, whom she described in loving, careful, invented detail, and I said, "He sounds wonderful. You deserve this," and I watched her believe I meant it. I told Adam I'd been thinking he was right, that I'd been too buried in the details for years, that maybe it was time I stepped back and let him and Celia drive the vision. He lit up. He actually took my hands across the dinner table and said he was so glad I finally saw it. He said, "You've always been the engine, Nora, but an engine shouldn't have to steer." And I smiled and I thought, an engine can also simply stop, Adam, and then we'll see how far the vision drives on charm. Quietly, I built my case the way you build a house, from the foundation up, in the order that holds. I hired a corporate attorney named Priya, who read my operating agreement, looked up at me over it, and said, "You wrote this?" I said yes. She said, "Nora, this is the cleanest founder document I have seen in 9 years of practice, and these two are about to sign themselves into a wall." I hired a forensic accountant who traced every dollar of the 14 months of siphoned money into Celia's shell entity, dated, itemized, and cross-referenced to Adam's approvals. Priya organized it into a binder. And then Priya asked the question that mattered. She said, "Do you want to win, or do you want to be safe? Because those are different plans, and I need to know which woman I'm working for." I thought about the empty closet when I was 9. I thought about the balcony photo. I said, I want to be safe. And then I want to win. In that order. And Priya smiled and said, "My favorite kind of client." There was one thing left to protect, and it was the thing they never even thought to take, because they never understood that it was the only thing that mattered. The clients. Adam thought clients belonged to whoever charmed them at dinner. Celia thought clients belonged to whoever designed the pretty rooms. But I was the one who answered the panicked call at 11 at night when a shipment was wrong. I was the one who remembered the client's daughter's name and their impossible mother-in-law and the exact shade of white that had made them cry at the reveal. Every master service agreement, every retainer, every ongoing contract I had written, and I had written them years ago without any hidden motive at all, to be between the client and the individual principal responsible for their account. And the principal on nearly every major account, in careful black ink, was me. They were about to seize a firm. They had never noticed that the firm was mostly a name, and the name was attached to relationships, and the relationships were attached to a person, and the person was the one they were erasing. Thursday came. We signed in our own conference room, the one I'd designed, with the long walnut table I'd chosen and the light I'd positioned so that everyone in it looked their best. Adam wore the blue tie I'd bought him. Celia wore a dress the color of a warning she didn't know she was giving. They slid the 41 pages across the walnut, and Adam said, gently, almost tenderly, "You don't have to read all of it. Nora, we know it's a lot." And I looked at the two people I had loved most in the world, and I picked up the pen, and I said, "Oh, I've read every word." And I signed. Their relief was a physical thing. Celia exhaled.
Adam beğenmedi.
They thought the signature was mine surrendering. It was mine confirming that they had, in front of a notary on the record, completed exactly the crime I needed them to complete. That night they took me out to celebrate my new, smaller, safer life. I let them buy the champagne. The good kind. It really is better. Celia was right about that, at least. I waited 11 days. Ruth said the waiting is where most people lose, because they cannot stand the silence, and they tip their hand out of sheer emotional exhaustion. So I let them enjoy it. I let Adam start speaking to me the way you speak to an employee. I let Celia begin, gently, to redecorate my role out of existence, CCNG me on decisions that used to be mine as a courtesy rather than a request. I let them relax all the way into the belief that it was over, and they had won. And in those 11 days, Priya finished the last of the filings, and my forensic accountant certified the final report, and I personally, quietly, called the 7 largest clients of Halden Row. I did not badmouth anyone. I simply told each of them that I was making a change, and that I wanted them to know, before they read anything official, that wherever I went, I would still be the one answering the phone at 11 at night. Every single one of them asked the same question. When do we move? On the 12th day, I triggered the buyout clause. My clause. The one I wrote at my kitchen table 11 years ago. Priya delivered it by courier to the firm and by email to Adam's and Celia's personal attorneys, all at once at 9 in the morning, so that there was no version of the day in which they heard it from me first and could shape the story. As the triggering partner, I set the terms of the independent valuation, and the independent valuation, conducted by a neutral firm, would of course discover what a forensic accountant had already documented, that 14 months of firm revenue had been diverted into a shell company, which does fascinating and terrible things to a company's valuation and to the personal liability of the partners who did the diverting. In the same envelope was a demand for the return of the misappropriated funds and a notice, copied to counsel, that the matter had been referred for review as potential fraud. And clipped to the very back, because Ruth said always let them find the worst thing last, was the notice that I was exercising my right to depart with my personally held client contracts. Adam called me 40 minutes later. I let it go to voicemail because Ruth told me to, and because I wanted to. He called 9 times. The messages went, in order, from confused, to reasonable, to wounded, to furious, to something I had never heard from him in 11 years, which was frightened. In the last one, he said the word I had been waiting for without knowing it. He said, "I can't believe you'd blindside me like this." Blindside. The man who forged a restructuring in secret, who moved our money into his mistress's company, who wrote the phrase failure to contribute about the woman who contributed everything, used the word blindside. I saved that voicemail. Not to listen to. I have never listened to it again. I saved it because I wanted, on the days it would inevitably get hard, to remember exactly who I had been dealing with, so that I would never once be tempted to feel sorry for him. It has worked. It works to this day. The firm they seized turned out to be an empty building. Within a month, 6 of the 7 major clients had followed me out the door, taking roughly 80% of the revenue with them, because it had never been Halden Row they were loyal to. It had been the woman who remembered their daughter's name. Celia, it turned out, could design a beautiful room but had never once in 19 years priced one, or staffed one, or kept a single client from walking when the shipment arrived wrong. Adam could charm a stranger at dinner, but could not charm a payroll into meeting itself. Within 2 months, they were running a decorated shell with 14 salaries, a lease I had negotiated at the top of the market, and almost no income. The machine they'd fought so hard to steal had only ever had one engine, and the engine had simply, quietly, as promised, stopped. They turned on each other fast. That surprised me. How fast, though Ruth said it never fails, that people who betray together were only ever loyal to the winning, and the moment there's no winning left, there's nothing holding them. The affair, which had survived on hotel rooms and stolen weekends and the shared thrill of a secret, did not survive a shared debt and a fraud referral. Celia's attorney, once he understood the exposure of the diverted funds, advised her to distance herself from Adam entirely, and she did, overnight, the way she'd once distanced herself from a color that had gone out of fashion. Adam, I heard, tried to blame it all on her, the shell company, the whole scheme, and there was a certain justice in watching the most charming man I ever met discover that charm does not work on a forensic accountant's spreadsheet, or on a bank, or on the specific kind of silence that a person gives you when they have already read every word. Celia asked to meet me, once, near the end. I almost said no. I went because Ruth said closure is a thing you give yourself, not a thing they grant you, and I wanted to look at her one more time as an equal, not as furniture.
She cried.
She said she never meant for it to go that far, that Adam had pulled her in, that she'd been unhappy, that our friendship had meant everything to her. And I believed the last part, oddly. I think it had. That was the tragedy of Celia. She could love you genuinely and betray you thoroughly in the same 19 years and never feel the contradiction, because to her they happened in different rooms. I told her the only true thing I had left for her. I said, Celia, I would have given you the spark for free, for the rest of our lives. All you ever had to do was not set my house on fire with it. And then I paid for my own coffee and I left, and that was the last time I ever spoke to my best friend. The settlement took 4 months, and it was not close. The diverted funds were returned with interest, because the alternative Priya laid out for Adam's attorney involved the word criminal appearing in a courtroom, and even Adam understood that. The understated valuation they'd engineered was thrown out, and the neutral valuation, arrived at on my terms, meant that when the buyout finally settled, I was bought out at the real number from a firm I no longer wanted, while keeping every client I'd built. The divorce was almost an afterthought by then. He did not get half of anything, because there was almost nothing left, and what remained was tangled in the debt of the empty firm he'd fought to seize. I kept the house. I kept the garden. I kept, most importantly, the thing I hadn't known was the prize until it was almost taken from me, which was the plain, unglamorous truth of what I was worth, printed at last in a number even Adam could not talk his way around. I want to tell you what I did with the client contracts because it's the part that still makes me smile in the grocery store for no reason. I started a new firm. A small one, at first in the study Adam never used, the one where I'd cried on the floor. I did not invent a name that sounded like two trustworthy strangers. I put my own name on the door. Keller Design. My name, the one I was born with, the one my father left behind, the one I decided at 9 years old I would make me the person who stays. 7 clients came with me on day 1. Within a year there were 19, and then I was hiring, and then I was the one turning work away. Ruth, who is now 80 and refuses to fully retire, comes in on Thursdays and reads my contracts before I send them, and every single time, she hands them back and says the same thing. Clean. That's the highest word she has. Clean. People ask me, when they hear a version of the story, whether I feel guilty for letting them go so far, for sitting at that signing, for letting them buy me champagne to celebrate my own erasure while I already held the pen that would undo them. And I understand the question, I do, but it has the shape backwards. I did not push anyone into anything. I did not forge a single document. I did not divert a single dollar or write a single lie. Every signature that undid them was a signature they fought to get. I did exactly one thing, the same thing I have done my whole life, the thing they mistook for weakness right up until it became the last thing they ever saw coming. I read the whole contract. I read every word. And when they handed me in black ink the complete and honest proof of who they really were, I did the one thing my father never taught me and life taught me instead. I believed them the first time. Adam sends an email about once a year. They've gotten shorter over time. The first one was long and full of the old charm, the lit window on the dark street, and I recognized every technique in it because I had once been warmed by all of them. I did not reply. The most recent one, last spring, was 4 words. It said, "You are the firm." That's all. No apology, because Adam has never in his life apologized for anything he could reframe as a compliment. Just, "You were the firm." And the strange thing is that reading it, I felt nothing sharp at all. Not anger. Not even the ghost of a love. I felt the way you feel looking at a house you used to live in from the window of a train that is not stopping. I closed the email. I did not save that one. And then I went back to work in the studio with my name on the door, and I answered a client's call because it was 11 at night, and I am still the one who stays. So here is the only advice I have from the woman who is furniture, who is the engine that shouldn't steer, who is the heart of everything we built right up until the night they toasted her and meant it as a goodbye. Be careful who you decide is invisible. The quiet one at the table, the one who reads every word, the one who never makes a scene, the one who does the unglamorous work that holds the whole thing up. That person is not blind. That person is the load-bearing wall, and you have built your entire beautiful life against her, and she has known it all along, and she has chosen, every single day, out of love, to hold you up anyway. Do not mistake that choice for an obligation. Do not mistake her patience for permission. And whatever else you do in this one short life, whatever you're tempted by, whoever you think won't notice, never, ever lie to the person who reads the whole contract. She kept the receipts. She always keeps the receipts. And she remembers, in careful black ink, exactly who you are.